weird Wednesday. Jessie's back. Back again. Jessie's back. Tell a friend. The weirdo's back. Weirdo's back. Weirdo's back. Weirdo's back. Oh, it's JessieDubz. I'm finally back. I know it hasn't been super weird up in here the past couple weeks, and I apologize for that. I've been working on my mental health, my brains, and also I've been reacting to something for literally over 6 months. So, yeah, life's been rough, and honestly, it seems like everyone who I'm talking to recently, we might all be in different ships, but we're all going through the same storm. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, you know what I'm saying? I've been told from people who know me best that I am ridiculously hard to get to know. So maybe one of these days I'll actually do a Weird Wednesday about me. You guys can help me out a little bit. That way you get to know me and I get to work on letting people know me. To anyone who's just good with that, I don't know, how you doing? How are you okay with that? Oh, and before I forget, I am on medication that makes me feel like I have 100 tabs open in my brain and I can't figure out where the music's coming from, kind of deal. So you might notice I'm even more chaotic in my storytelling than normal. And I apologize for that. Like I said, we're gonna work together here. We're gonna help each other. Yeah, we're gonna see how this goes. You're welcome for the entertainment ahead of time. I'm sure I've done some weird ass shit. Yeah, I'm good at that. This week we're talking about the family, aka the fellowship. I'll go over obviously the usual quick summary for you, so it piques your interest, and then you guys can check it out yourselves if you're into it. Leave me comments, let me know what you think. What's your opinion of the family? Do you think it's real? Do you think it's just a conspiracy theory? What are your opinions? Let me know. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this Weird Wednesday. It's been a while. I missed you guys. I hope you missed me too. So, the beginning is obviously the best place to start in any story. But especially this one. This one's a lot. Yeah, I'm sorry. I broke my brain, so I'm gonna break all of yours too. Welcome. So I'm gonna bring you guys back to April 1935, where a Norwegian man by the name of Abraham Veretti gathered 19 local wealthy businessmen to gather and pray, but also they use this meeting as a tool to discuss democracy without politics. After much success in Norway with this meeting that they ended up calling the Fellowship and referred to each other as brothers. Mater's already distraught. Relocated himself to Washington, D.C., realizing how many powerful people are there, and pitched his idea to create a fellowship there as well. So at this time, the president that he was pitching it to was President Eisenhower, and he initially declined, saying how the First Amendment is keep church and state separate. So he thought it would be inappropriate to bring something like the fellowship to the state. But keep in mind at this time, it was pretty ugly because everything was still pretty rough from the war. So at this time, the morale of the public was pretty low. So Eisenhower actually noticed that the morale started picking up once he did start including God and religion in his speeches. It didn't take long for him to change his mind. And that's where the prayer breakfast was first born. Ever since Eisenhower, every president since then has actually attended these prayer breakfasts as well. I'm actually just going to do my eyebrows off camera because it's just super repetitive and boring. So, 1 second, hold that thought. I'll be right back. I feel like this is a big change. Okay, but on with my story. So, the fellowship, at this time, they're considering themselves a network of people with the shared common interest of Jesus and religious matters. It's like a church for businessmen, I guess. You could look at it that way. And then beyond that, they believe that they have been chosen by God for leadership roles and to do God's work around the community. They consider themselves imperfect vessels trying to do God's perfect work. So that means that obviously they're going to mess up because they're only human, but essentially because they've been chosen by God, they don't get held to the same standards as the rest of us do. It's an interesting way of thinking of things. Quite the pedestal they're putting themselves on. I feel like Trump. Good morning, everybody. China, China, China all the time. I am going to make America great again. But really, I'm just a giant. Okay, I'm gonna fix this. But also, beyond everything that I mentioned, this group also decides to remain more secret than having like an open door policy. They handpick the members or the fellow brothers to join. So that means me and you, unless we were to have gained some kind of higher up status or gain more power somehow, that they feel like they could work with you and benefit off of you and you could help each other out, then you wouldn't be considered a member and you wouldn't be invited into this group. They only invited people with more status, it seemed. A lot of lawyers and businessmen and news reporters. Abraham Veretti died in 1969, and then a gentleman by the name of Doug Coe took over the fellowship at that point. And a lot of people thought that this was a peculiar choice because out of all the people that were in this fellowship by then, he wasn't super well known. He didn't necessarily have tremendous power or anything like that. And after Doug Coe took over, he decided to take it kind of to the next level, I guess you could say. And he focused a lot more on the secrecy of the fellowship and the brothers, saying how the more invisible you are, the more powerful you can be and the more influence you can have around the world. Many people have talked about him saying those exact words. So again, at this point, the fellowship had grown tremendously. Like I mentioned before, they're actually having a once a year breakfast that the presidents have been attending ever since Eisenhower. And beyond that, apparently, the fellowship members will go to meet literally anybody to talk to them and pray. The bigger the monster, the more of God's will, I guess, is being done by praying together and by sharing a love of God together. Like, I can feel Jesus coursing through me when we pray together. So they've met with terrorists, they've met with war criminals, they've met with dictators. These people literally meet with anybody and pray with them. I'm sorry, but if you're meeting with such intense people, I highly doubt that the only thing that you guys are doing is talking about Jesus. Sorry, I don't say it. But anyway, that's what they say. And I believe, honestly, the main reason why they put such a focus on the religion aspect of the fellowship and the family is because they actually had that tax exempt status whenever they had the religious ties in their network of people. They obviously did everything in the power to not define themselves as an organization. That would have affected the tax exempt status. But yeah, for a long motherfucking time, this fellowship didn't even have to pay any taxes on their network of people. Like I mentioned before, the fellowship was super secretive. Like, they didn't want anybody knowing anything about them at all. So you're probably wondering how we even know anything about them since they had such a high focus on discretion. Don't worry, I'm gonna tell you. A man by the name of Jeff Charlotte was actually a brother. So Jeff Charlotte was attending college, and one of his buddies ended up inviting him to this house to become a fellow brother. And whenever he showed up, he said that it had very much like a frat house feel. There was everybody there, from atheists to people who believed in God, and it was very real. They created a very close-knit family atmosphere, so all the guys would bond and become very, very close. But it was interesting, to say the least. So I'm going to go over Jeff's experience quickly, just to give you a little insider view of the family. So Jeff says that whenever you are invited to become a brother, you first have to go through an interview process. So Jeff shows up to the house, which is called Ivanwald, the Ivanwald house, and goes through the interview process, and I guess they like what they see, so they pass him through to where he goes through, I guess, a couple weeks of initiation process before he becomes a true brother. You could stay at this house for honestly as long or as little as you liked. There was no real enforcement or I guess like rules or anything against that. There was other rules that you had to follow within the house if you wanted to live there, though. Honestly, the rules are what you'd typically expect at any school, let alone a Christian one. So there was no drinking, no smoking, no swearing. They weren't allowed any sex, obviously, like premarital sex. And apparently there was an all-girls school as well, which obviously Jeff never got to go see or anything like that. I think sometimes the two houses would host certain events together, so they might have interacted a little bit here and there. Maybe gather for socials, like a dance or something maybe, but I don't think they really collided too often. I'd like to find out more about the girl side of things, to be honest with you, because obviously I'm about to tell you the guy side. So if any of you know, drop a comment and let me know. Give me links and stuff. But anyway, like I was saying before, there was a lot of rules, but honestly they're pretty typical. At a basketball court, apparently that's what they do most of the time. You did have chores if you wanted to live in this house as well. I think certain days of the week or something like that, they would clean toilets and rake leaves and stuff. And the longer that Jeff was around, the more red flags he was just starting to notice around him. Noticed that there was a lot of different VIPs showing up to the house for these breakfasts and for certain events, or just to kind of let their hair down and relax a little bit. People from like Uganda and like just everywhere. No matter what party they were in, if they were liberal or conservative, whoever would show up to this house. And then the other red flags that Jeff was starting to notice was in their sessions, whenever they would go to their prayer meetings and the counselors and with the higher ups, some of the preachings that they would read and start discussing within these groups were pretty next level compared to what you typically hear and see. Oh yeah, before I forget too, the first day, whenever you showed up to this house and you're invited and you become a brother, you get handed this Bible. But it's not your typical Bible that you see at churches or literally anywhere else. So the front of the book, it literally just says Jesus. Jesus. It's not very thick, you know what I mean? It doesn't seem like it would be a super intense read compared to the actual Bible. But some of the things that they would talk about and discuss, they seem to put themselves on a pedestal compared to the rest of the world, like you and me. And just a perfect example in the documentary that I was watching, let's say a fellow brother had raped a girl. I think it was even more. I think it was like had raped 3 girls or something like that. And they pretty much went in to discuss how you would do whatever you could for that brother to help him. And yeah. So in their mentality, because they were chosen by God for leadership positions in the world, it doesn't matter if they've made mistakes or if they do make mistakes, because they're going to change the world and we need them around and the rest doesn't matter. So by that logic, they can pretty much do whatever they want, and no matter what, if it's a fellow brother, you need to look out for him and do what you can to protect him at all costs. And keep in mind that these people like truly believe that they are the leaders of the world, okay? And the perfect example of this is Trump, right? He had literally over 20 rape accusations against that man, and somehow he's still trucking on in this world as if everything's fine and dandy. And I know shit like that happens all over the world and it's fucking awful, but it's a scary thought when you start kind of putting 2 and 2 together and realizing who is behind all these things. So, like I was saying before, Jeff obviously is starting to keep his guard up, but he's actually going to school to become a journalist. So he decides that he's going to stick around and see what he can find out about these guys, but he's going to have to be very careful. You're going to give yourself away pretty quickly if you're snooping around too much, right? So, but he starts taking notes and seeing what he can find out about these guys. After this discussion, don't worry if you've raped anybody before, because we have your back talk that all the boys got. One of the brothers receives a phone call from his fiancée. Unfortunately, she was sexually assaulted, and she was, for obvious reasons, very upset. So the brother's obviously upset too, and he's trying to figure out what to do, if he should go home and be with his fiancée or what. And the other brothers start questioning what she would have been wearing that night and blaming her, saying how it was her fault that she was assaulted, and literally all the textbook no shit that not supposed to do, they did. So it doesn't take long before the brother's like, fuck this, I'm just gonna leave and be with my wife to be, because he's a smart man. So that's what he does. But before he leaves, he knows that Jeff is trying to figure things out a little bit. So he hands him a bunch of documents that I guess he had or had found or something, laughing and joking as he handed it to him, saying how it's funny how an organization that doesn't exist so much documents and paperwork on themselves. Jeff starts to go through all this paperwork, and a lot of it is the original founder, Abraham, and Doug Coe's notes. They would also say things like, don't worry about the sheep, worry about the wolf, which essentially translates into, don't worry about like most of the people out there, worry about the people with power. They wanted all the wolves who had power to be a brother, because those are the people who, again, have the most influence. And one of the things that freaked me out personally the most was there was a document showing pretty much that they wanted a brother from every country around the world, the whole world. That's right, that goddamn globe. But also, they wanted brothers from very specific job titles as well. So the ones that I could see on the document whenever I watched it was politicians, news reporters, journalists. I think I even remembered seeing like the medical field. They would seem like they wanted like a person for everything, everywhere. Which, as a goal, as a network of people, it's fucking weird and scary. Just knowing that there's like a secret family behind the scenes who's just a bunch of wealthy people controlling everything and working together to make sure that they don't lose their wealth and stuff like that. I don't know about you, but it freaks me out. Oh, and one of the other goals on this document was to reach a spiritual awakening around the world. Like, what the fuck? I think I might have mentioned this before, but they really wanted to keep their tax-exempt status, and Jeff actually had that. It's in writing saying how they need to try and keep that tax-exempt status. After Jeff went public with all of these things, I believe that's whenever there was an investigation into the fellowship and into all these things. Yeah. And they had some actual ministers and actual priests from actual churches go into this place so they had their opinions as well on what to classify this network of people as. And the churches all decided that it was definitely not a church by any means, because it seemed like they had a very closed door policy. Like, they won't let just anybody in. It was very exclusive. They went through the Bible that they have that just said Jesus on the front. And yeah, they said that some of the scriptures involved and stuff like that was just very unusual, to say the least. Another way that the fellowship kind of made headliners without really meaning to was a politician had accidentally mentioned another house located in another city called the C Street House, and that one was an adult house, so meant for strictly politicians, and he accidentally mentioned it because he'd gone there after cheating on his wife for his brothers to help him out, and that's how it got into the news. But let me get back to Doug Coe for a hot second. Doug Coe, like I mentioned before, he took over after Abraham died. He was his successor. Like I was saying, he definitely made sure that everyone who was a brother was very discreet. And he actually insisted, instead of calling it the fellowship, he insisted it be called the family. Because that's how they were. They were like a family, right? Whenever you're in need or you're in trouble, you call your family and they help you out. Like I was saying before, how he would hold these national prayer breakfasts once a year. He said that everybody who goes to these national prayer breakfasts is invited. So there's no way for the public to buy their ticket into these events. The only way you get in is if you're invited and you have your invitation. Like a family, right? Because that's how he describes it there as well. He's like, you don't make your family buy tickets to the event, you invite them. And like I was saying before, this family consists of a lot of scary people. It's not just like your average everyday politicians that are scary enough, let's face it. The way Jeff described it, which is honestly like the perfect way to think about it, is think of those prayer breakfasts as like an incubator. Nothing is necessarily planned to happen at the prayer breakfast other than praying together and whatever. But action comes out of the prayer breakfast because it is a place where you can network and you can get to know a lot of very powerful people. And if you are a bad person, that's obviously the perfect place that you'd want to go to learn a lot of information and to cause some shit. There was actually a woman from Russia who was charged more recently, I think it was 2017, because she was essentially a Russian spy trying to figure out information and bring it back to her home country. Now, this National Prayer Breakfast has a policy that says the National Prayer Breakfast forbids activities for personal, political, or financial gain. How they enforce this? No idea. I don't know. Just, again, put the warning label on there so you can't get sued, right? So, the thing that got me about this prayer breakfast, too, is whenever you ask who puts it on, you'll be told it's members of Congress that hold the National Prayer Breakfast every year, when really it's not. Really, it's this fellowship, Doug Coe, who gets mentioned a couple times, and who is there but never speaks at his own events. I'm sorry, I'm struggling right now because I really wanted this to be like a brighter orange. So I'm gonna fucking make it happen with another palette because I don't think I got one bright enough in that one. Hold on. See what this does. Gonna do the orangey thing that I want. Oh yeah, there you go. Oh yeah, mama. Anyway, back to the store. I think I forgot to mention, it actually didn't even have a website. So it was very, unless you got invited in kind of deal, you would have no idea it existed. Should I do liner? I always want liner. Who are we kidding? Some other things that Jeff notes on that I find pretty intense is that you actually see more about the fellowship in countries that we don't hear about in the news and stuff like that often. Like Romania and Albania in the past couple years have actually been experiencing more hate crimes against the LGBTQ community. And that is because there's a brother who has been going out to those countries for the past 3 years to discuss his belief and views on every family being between a man and a woman specifically, and how there should be no family that is any different than his, essentially. And because of this, it's actually been spreading like wildfire. His beliefs and his views and his hate speech has amplified the hate towards the LGBTQ community. How often in your news do you hear anything about those countries? Not very often, right? Like, I didn't actually know anything about that until watching this documentary. Concentrate on flying away, 'cause my wings always end up fucking huge. It's fine. It's fine, guys. Happens every fucking time, but it's fine. Anyway, when you ask the fellowship or the family about it, they say, oh, like, we had no idea what he was talking about. We actually don't agree with him at all on what he's saying. But if he's saying those things, it's because God told him to do it. And God made him do it. Because he's chosen by God to do God's work. So if he's saying and doing those things, it's because that is his path to do so. We don't stand by his words, but we will pay for him to travel to all these countries to spread his word and to say all these awful things that we don't see it that way. But we'll pay for him to go around the world and spread his speech about it anyway. There's so many crazy things in this world, and stuff like this just makes my brain hurt because crazy shit. Like, we have some religious cults that literally has connections and ties to even the darkest people in the world. But we don't agree with these dark and awful people. We just go and pray with them. Yeah, okay. One of the things that they also discuss in this documentary that I find just very disturbing, how they're also like calmly talking about it, I guess, is how I believe it was a politician, and he was openly discussing what politicians call wedges. Just straight up talking about how they'll literally create issues for people so that they divide, and it's easier for people to be manipulated because there's not as many in one big group. At that point, they've separated them. So they create issues like abortion, because now, instead of there being one solid group of people, now you have two sides, essentially, fighting each other instead of looking at the one guy who caused the fight. Picture there being one human just up against a whole crowd of people. It's easier for, obviously, the one human to throw in an issue to the crowd so that the crowd gets distracted with each other and they start ganging up on each other instead of the one guy who caused the issue. But anyway, this is cool. I dig this. Isn't this fun though? I'm having fun right now in this moment. But I'll be right back because I need to do my lashes and my lippies. And then I'm gonna wrap up this video. So that's essentially my story on the family. It's a complicated one. Like I said, I didn't even scrape the surface for you, really. Definitely pop on over to Netflix and check out the family documentary. Ooh. It's a 5-part episode series. It just goes way more in depth for you. You'll have a way better understanding of the family and what they're all about. I just kind of scraped the surface for you. That's all I have to say for now. Keep on rocking in the free world. I promise I'll see you soon, even if it's not necessarily next week. I'll be back. Bye, guys.